From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's coming up. During our first half hour, we'll talk with K-State's Jason Griffin. Jason will discuss his research work this past year with industrial hemp as a specialty crop for Kansas. He conducted variety performance trials for 3 kinds of industrial hemp, for CBD production, for fiber production, and for dual-purpose grain and fiber production. And Jason came up with information that will help shed important light on the viability of industrial hemp as an alternative crop in this state. He'll be in next. And further ahead, K-State's Charlie Lee will talk about the critical role that you landowners and hunters play in deer population management. Plus much more ahead on this Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. This is the K-State Radio Network, and welcome once again to another Agriculture Today. Good to have you aboard. Well, as you know, Kansas State University routinely evaluates crop varieties for their performance in Kansas growing conditions. Wheat, corn, grain sorghum, soybeans, canola, and so on are all put through their paces at K-State field trials in numerous locations around the state. Well, here in 2019, the university veered off into another direction in as far as variety testing. K-State was commissioned to conduct independent trials assessing the performance of industrial hemp varieties. And the lion's share of that work took place at K-State's John C. Pear Horticultural Center, just to the south of Wichita. And the individual largely responsible for overseeing that work is with us now, the director of that center, K-State's Jason Griffin. And Jason, to note at the outset, you've been fairly well immersed in this work and the topic of industrial hemp production in Kansas in general for quite a few months now.
As one does when they enter down this path, yes.
Tell us about how K-State was charged to take upon this research and what exactly was the university asked to do?
Well, with the passing of the 2014 Farm Bill, the USDA gave individual states the ability to develop sort of pilot research programs, is exactly what it's called. And so as this wave was sort of moving across the country, several states jumped on board early. We were one of the sort of middle states to get on board. And so we could just kind of see this wave coming across the country, and we knew that Kansas farmers wanted to get into this industry, into this crop. And obviously our job with K-State Research and Extension is research and extension. So our job was to conduct research to help farmers be more successful with this crop. And it's a brand new crop that nobody should have legal experience growing. Right. It's a brand new crop that we just needed some baseline information on how to grow this crop successfully.
And do need to distinguish between the hemp crops. This is an industrial version, right?
That is correct. Industrial hemp is cannabis sativa with a THC level below 0.3%. That is industrial hemp. If you're over 0.3, technically it's considered marijuana.
And to stress even further, K-State, and especially with your work, was tasked to look at the agronomic basics here of growing hemp as opposed to the economics and the marketing venues, so forth, right?
That is correct. I'm not an ag economist. I'm not a marketing person. I like to grow plants. So, yeah, we were looking at basic production practices to start off with.
And the Pear Center was selected for a great lot of this because of the setup with the high tunnels and such, right?
So we were actually a perfect site. We're an isolated location. We're completely fenced in. We got great soil. Hemp should be considered a specialty crop, particularly hemp for CBD is a horticulture crop. So we're the perfect spot to do this.
So now the center has 1 year of production, research, and field trial data under its belt. And we'll report on 2 trials that you conducted this past year. One looks at industrial hemp for the CBD market, and that's been the attention getter, has it not, Jason?
That is correct. 99% of the people growing industrial hemp in Kansas this year were growing for CBD or cannabidiol. Yep.
Yeah, and explain that. That has medicinal value on the market.
That is correct. Cannabidiol or CBD is the compound that the plant produces that people are using for various, I want to say disorders, but psychological issues or pain. Yes, it's the. I don't want to use the word medical, but that's what they're using it as a medical product.
Well, about your variety trials, what were you attempting to discover about various hemp types for this purpose?
So for year number 1 and never having any experience with it, we wanted to see if this crop would be successful in Kansas. The environment plays a big role with cannabis and how it grows and the chemistry that the plant undergoes. So we were looking at different varieties of CBD hemp, because there are hemp specifically for CBD and hemp specifically for other reasons. So the CBD hemp, we wanted to grow those and just see which ones were better adapted, to see if any of them went hot, which is over the 0.3% THC. And we wanted to look at different fertility regimes, different growing environments, and just see what worked well for us so we can make recommendations.
So you had quite a number of varieties in this particular trial?
We had 7 different CBD varieties, which was about 7 more than I thought we would have at this point last year.
Right. And you looked at their growth performance in 2 settings, right?
Specifically, yes. We looked at growing inside a high tunnel and outside in full sun.
And part of the purpose behind that was, as is depicted in a report that you put out, which we'll talk about, when growing for the CBD market, minimizing pollination of the crop is important.
That is correct. It's well known that high tunnels in the specialty crops arena, it's well known that high tunnels have certain advantages over growing plants outside. So for our purposes, we were looking at reduced solar irradiance, reduced wind, reduced pest presence. But specifically for hemp, we had our high tunnel completely enclosed in insect screen. So we were trying, which is a really, really fine netting. So we were trying to see if that insect netting, the insect screen, would reduce the amount of pollen getting into the high tunnel. And it appears that it did.
So a protective environment as compared to the outdoor setting where plants were grown, and noting all of these in containers, correct?
Yes, they're all in containers, yes. So the outside plants were, of course, fully pollinated because we did have fiber and grain on the station as well. And if you're new to the cannabis industry, the hemp industry, pollination is a big deal. The CBD is produced in the female flower buds, and if those female flower buds get pollinated, your concentration of CBD just tanks into the basement, almost none, almost unrecognizable. So you have to keep pollen away from those female flower buds.
And then you tacked on several other variables you were interested in, one being fertilization, type, and rate.
So we were looking at a lot of end users of this product are interested in organic product. So we were looking at an organic fertilizer compared to a conventional sort of fertilizer that we would use in a nursery production situation. And that was our main goal.
What did you discover then about these varieties grown for the CBD market, about their adaptability to Kansas conditions, about their ability to thrive and produce at a high level for that product?
Well, we had 7 different varieties, and all in the High Tunnel project, we had 5 different varieties in there, and every single variety is completely different. You could walk through there, and you could pick each one out. So they each responded like all plants. They each have their own sort of growth habit and growth pattern. And we found a couple that were kind of tall and leggy and kind of difficult to control, and a couple that were shorter and more well-branched, and they behaved a little bit better. And so simply from a management standpoint, we found a couple of varieties that we kind of like and a couple of varieties that we don't really like that well, just from management.
But in the comparison of high tunnel growth versus outdoor growth, there was a distinct advantage overall for those varieties in the tunnels.
Yeah, we really like the plants in the high tunnel. That protected environment, they were larger, which larger isn't always better, but they were larger and they had more flower buds, which is where all the CBD is in the flower buds. So having more buds is important. So they had more buds, they had a higher CBD content, they had a higher chlorophyll content. The plants inside the high tunnel were just superior.
So is that to suggest, and there will be likely more research in this arena, but to suggest that if one out there is interested in producing industrial hemp for the CDB output, they are going to have some sort of climate control environment in which to grow?
There is enough what we call feral hemp around the state. That's hemp that's just growing in the ditches and pastures, and there's enough of that around the state that is shedding pollen and spreading pollen around the area. I think it would be very difficult to have a large-scale outside CBD production system successfully without somehow protecting those plants from just feral pollen.
But by the same token, if that facility is available and one is interested, why they will have varieties available that may make this worthwhile from the agronomic vantage point.
Correct. I think probably constructing some sort of high tunnel or a greenhouse, something to help keep pollen away from your plants. Yes, these varieties, some of the varieties did very well. This was our first year. We probably made some mistakes, and we will probably improve as any grower does as they get more experience with the crop. We'll probably get a little bit better.
And did want to follow up. You intend on another round of testing of these varieties in your trials next year, presumably.
Absolutely. Yes, we are keeping plants over the winter, so we'll have some to start off with next year, and we fully intend to continue this research and see where it goes. It's fun to experiment with a new crop.
Well, the CBD or cannabidiol market is just one outlet for industrial hemp. There are other potential products that this crop could serve, and you looked at those in yet another trial. We need to take a break, Jason, but after which we'll pick up on that phase of your research at the John C. Pear Center.
Sounds great.
Stand by if you would. Jason Griffin, the director of that center for K-State, is with us. An overview here of the industrial hemp research ongoing at that center in this first year of the testing. Jason will be back with us shortly here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today resumes. Across the way, the director of the John C. Pear Horticultural Center, Kansas State University, just south of Wichita, Jason Griffin is telling us about the just completed round of industrial hemp variety trials that center has conducted for Kansas State this past year, and covering some of the findings so far about various varieties and whether industrial hemp will be suitable for production here in Kansas. So, Jason, we talked about the CBD hemp variety trials that you took on at the center this past year. The other phase of your work had to do with dual-purpose and fiber industrial hemp trials. Now, this is a different, right?
It is completely different. I would consider hemp for fiber and grain and hemp for CBD to be almost completely different crops. You can't even think about them as being similar. They're completely different.
You're looking at volume in this case as opposed to a specific product output.
They're different varieties. The production system is different. The harvest is, everything about them is different.
Well, talk about how you approached this work, if you would. You had more varieties involved in these trials, correct?
So for this project, we had 14 different dual-purpose varieties, and dual-purpose is hemp that is harvested for grain and fiber. So when it's ready, a combine would come by and take the grain heads off the top, and then you come back later with a swather and bale the stalks, and that's dual-purpose. And then the fibers are simply really tall, really straight. You don't worry about the grain, you just go for the fiber when it's ripe. And
in the sense of grain, you're looking at actual yield. In the sense of the fiber, you're looking at tonnage, basically?
Exactly. Yep. Pounds per acre. Yep.
And you launched this trial at a couple of sites, and at least one of them had troubles, your own, just south of Wichita. The first planting didn't pan out so well.
Yeah, so I like to joke that it never rains at our facility, and we are under a perpetual state of drought, except for when you plant a really valuable crop, you are guaranteed to get a 3-inch rainfall the next day. And that's exactly what happened. We planted our crop, and we got a 3-inch rainfall the next day, and the soil crusted, and not a seedling came up.
So you had to replant at a later date. And we should talk about that for a moment. What original planting date were you operating with?
So ideally, we'd like to shoot for a mid-May planting. That gives our plants plenty of season to get tall. If you're going for fiber, you want nice tall plants. So a mid-May planting, which we'd then harvest probably sometime around September. But because it was our first year and we didn't have our seed suppliers lined up and we were waiting on seed supplies, we didn't get these planted until the end of June. And
we should note as well, you had companion plantings for research at Colby at K-State's Northwest Research and Extension Center there.
We do, yes. We have a planting out there, Dr. Lucas Haig, and he is looking at water use efficiency in those plots out there as well. Yep.
But let's talk about the varieties that you were looking at for grain productivity and what paces you put those through. What were you interested in tracking there?
So again, this being year number 1, we were interested in which of these varieties will do well. These varieties come from all over the world, and those from northern latitudes, when we planted them, they grew to about 18 inches tall, and they immediately went to flower and seed because they're used to those longer days up north in the summer. So that was an issue, whereas some of the other varieties from more southerly latitudes tended to grow a little bit taller, up to 6 feet tall. So that was a big deal, just simply looking at varieties and which one would produce well for us. We had planned to incorporate drought as one of our treatments this year, but we received about 200% of our normal rainfall this year, so drought was not an option for us.
Very difficult. And did you discover varieties that serve the grain purpose well in productivity, harvestability, and all that goes with that?
Absolutely. We had a couple of varieties that produced very well. One of them was over a ton per acre of grain, which when we compare our data to some of my colleagues around the country, over a ton per acre is very impressive. So we're growing a grain crop, which Kansas farmers are very familiar with growing grain crops, and it looks like we might be able to do this one pretty well. That's based on 1 year's data.
And as far as inputs that went into these varieties, fertilization and the like, anything out of the ordinary? What?
No, our fertilization regime was 100 pounds per acre pre-plant, and that was it. And because there are no products labeled for industrial hemp, there was no insecticides used, there was no fungicides used, there were no products that we could use, so we didn't. So it was fertilizer and a little bit of irrigation as needed.
Mm-hmm. And don't want to overlook that you had pests work on this crop as well as the fiber crop. And was that troublesome?
So some of the pests that we had were, of course, the worms, the Lepidopterus worms. They, of course, love the grain. So we did have several issues there with the Lepidopterus caterpillars eating the grain. We had a stem borer that we saw occasionally, and of course it was our first year, and we only saw a few instances. Now, whether that population will increase year after year, we'll have to wait and see. And oh my goodness, aphids. I have never seen as many aphids in my life as I saw on these plants. We were in there harvesting. When we left the field, we were covered with aphids. They were crawling all over us. It didn't appear to affect the crop, but it must have. We didn't have any controls. We couldn't control for aphids, but that level of aphid presence must have affected the crop somehow. But we still got a good yield. That's
the point here. You weren't spraying whatsoever because it's prohibited on this crop. You did find varieties which could bear up well under that pressure, so there's something impressive going on there agronomically.
Yeah, and it leads to the old adage, like more research is needed. We need to figure these out. We need to figure if there are varieties that are resistant to the aphids or if the aphids at least prefer less. There's a whole window of breeding opportunities and selection, and yeah, we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah. And talk about the fiber side of your variety trials as well, if you would.
The fiber side was fun. Those plants got to about 12 feet tall. For anybody who's ever been lost in a patch of overgrown bamboo, that's kind of what it felt like. They're planted very close together. The seeding rate is twice as much as for the dual purpose, because we want plants close together so they grow tall, they grow straight, they don't have as many leaves, the internodes are stretched out. The agronomists that have been doing this for more years than I have in other states, they say the magic number is 5 tons of matter per acre for fiber. And we did on our first year have one variety that went over 5 tons per acre. So we're pretty proud of that.
Yeah. And the other varieties, were they anywhere near that benchmark?
We had one that was close and one that still has a ways to go. But again, I think we can get there. I think it was just our first year. I think we got some work to do and some different things that we can do to help those along a little bit.
And most are not familiar with the nature of hemp, but when growing for fiber, you're looking at the leaf matter, you're looking at the stem, everything?
We are looking at stem only. The stem is hollow. It looks like a big straw when you cut it off. And most of the white matter on the inside is called herd fiber. It has lower value than the other fiber. The phloem tissue is the bast fiber, and that's what people think of as the rope, the real stringy fiber.
Now, Jason, as a sidebar, you also, just for interest, evaluated these fiber and grain fiber varieties for potential of CBD output as well, did you not?
Yes, so there is a school of thought out there that why take all this labor and effort to grow these CBD plants in high tunnels or greenhouses, which they come out to around 10 to 12% CBD, if you can just grow an agronomic crop and say it's only 4% CBD. If you've invested less labor and less infrastructure and you just get your same CBD content, final quantity, but you just do it by mass numbers. So there is that school of thought. Our plants had very, very low levels. I don't think we'll get there this way, but it was an effort.
At least you looked at it.
Right.
So that's a quick summary of the two variety trials. Again, one looking at the CBD output of varieties, the other at the yield and the fiber content of the dual-purpose or fiber varieties. Where from here, Jason?
Where from here? Well, once we have gathered ourselves from this past growing season and sorted through the mess, and we're going to probably head down a similar path next year. There are lots of varieties that we haven't tried, and it's hard to base recommendations on 1 year's evaluation, especially a year like this, where I don't think we ever reached 100 degrees this year at our facility, and we had plenty of rainfall. So I'm really anxious to see what these varieties will do under a normal year.
And especially with droughty conditions.
Correct, with normal drought conditions. And we're interested in following up with some fertility work. And we saw some interesting things that kind of, research 1 year kind of leads you to research the next year. It generates more ideas. So, yeah, we will be breaking soil again this spring, and we'll give it another go.
Well, given the interest in this as it's been building up over the last, couple of years, you will be posting a couple of reports on this variety trial work for both series of trials.
That is correct. As per the law, as per Kansas Department of Agriculture requires, we have to submit a report, as does everybody who got a license this year at the end of the year. And I just submitted my reports last week to Kansas Department of Agriculture. So they are on their website. And I would just like to remind people that that's why you come to K-State, is to get this sort of research-based information. This isn't hearsay. These are real replicated trials with data and statistics, and hopefully you can trust what's in these documents.
And the plan is very, very soon now there will be K-State fact sheets covering your data out there through the K-State Research and Extension channels.
That's correct. Hopefully we'll get that up and going hopefully this winter. Yep.
Be watching for those. Great work and a new undertaking for you and your team down there at the center. So, Jason, we appreciate you sharing what you've uncovered so far about industrial hemp variety performance. We'll talk again.
Thank you very much.
Jason Griffin, Director of the John C. Pear Horticultural Center, which again is just south of Wichita. Agriculture Today will be back after these moments away. You're tuned to the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
We're back now on Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson with you, and with today's agricultural news headlines now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the increasing stress on the Kansas winter wheat crop is illustrated in the USDA's final Kansas Crop Progress and Condition Report for the season. And, of course, that stress is tied to declining soil moisture conditions. For the week ending this past Sunday, our topsoil moisture supplies in the state, only 2% surplus, 48% adequate, but now 50% short to very short, while subsoil moisture is at 2% surplus, 57% adequate, and 41% short to very short now. The condition of the winter wheat crop this week, falling to 38% good to excellent, 38% fair, and 24% poor to very poor. On the national level, as of Sunday, 8% of the nation's corn crop was still standing in the fields. That represents a total of over 7 million acres left to harvest. North Dakota moved ahead just 7 points, reaching 43% harvested as of Sunday. Michigan and Wisconsin both only 74% harvested. South Dakota now at 83%, Iowa at 95%, and Illinois 96% now. The only other crops that NASS included in yesterday's report, cotton, estimated at 89% harvested, and sunflowers, which were 73% harvested. Again, this is the last weekly report from the USDA for the 2019 growing season. For December through February, they'll issue monthly reports, the first of which will be posted on January the 2nd. The weekly reports will resume in March. House Democrats have reached a tentative agreement with labor leaders and the White House over the rewrite of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade deal. The USDA's Gary Crawford has more.
We're getting reports now from several sources that the House Ways and Means Committee, the administration, and Mexico may be very close to an agreement that would allow the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, USMCA, to move forward in the ratification process. It's been held up on Capitol Hill for months, with some lawmakers wanting more in the deal on
enforcement.
Real enforcement.
Enforcement.
Meaningful enforcement.
However, in Indianapolis Monday, Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue told reporters,
I honestly think these enforceability arguments have been more of a smokescreen of delay than anything else.
Perdue said at that time he didn't have any direct knowledge of exactly when a final deal would be officially announced.
I know Ambassador Lighthizer was working very hard, had the Mexicans in last week, and hopefully we've gotten some resolution between the enforceability provisions that had been wanted by some and Mexico.
Some lawmakers had wanted stronger enforcement of the agreement's labor requirements. Mexico not in favor of some of those enforcement provisions. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Now, details still need to be finalized, and the U.S. Trade Representative will need to submit the implementing legislation to Congress. No vote has been scheduled. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi reportedly has yet to sign off on the accord. And the EPA's final rule for the 2020 biofuel and 2021 biodiesel levels and how they intend to account for small refinery exemptions has arrived at the Office of Management and Budget for review. Biofuel supporters continue to express disappointment at the EPA's supplemental plan to account for those exemptions. However, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa has continued to express hope that the EPA will live up to the White House commitment on conventional ethanol under the renewable fuel standard. Now we turn to K-State dairy specialist Mike Brook for this week's edition of Milk Lines. Mike?
Today I'd like to talk with our Kansas dairy farmers about annual evaluations and how we maybe approach the situation as we evaluate employees on our dairy farms. When you do evaluations, do you approach them as the boss or the coach? You might want to think about that a little bit. As we think about our employees and we think about the team that we have around our farm, are we the boss or are we the coach? Well, in reality, we're probably both. However, if we want our employees to grow, we need to think about the coaching side of being the boss on the dairy farm or being the manager on the dairy farm, whatever the case may be. So let's think about it from the coach's perspective. On your team, you have lots of different players. Larger the farm, the more players you have. Each of those players has specific responsibilities. So as you approach the evaluation process, did each of those players or employees, did they really understand what the expectations were for their position? If they didn't, well, that probably means we need to do some work on our job descriptions and our expectations for each of those positions that we have on the farm. Realizing that on larger farms, we probably have several people that fit into the same slot. For example, in the milking parlor, have a group of people that are responsible for milking the cows. Those positions are the same, just have different people filling those spots at different times. So in the case of the milkers, what really are the critical expectations for those positions? What things do they have to perform every shift? What things do they need to do efficiently every day or every time they're on the farm to meet the expectations of that position? Make sure you've defined that clearly for them. That's probably the easy part. Now let's talk about the hard part of being the coach. Hard part about being the coach is looking at all your players that you have, your employees, and deciding how you're going to grow them into better players, better employees. You might say, well, that's their responsibility. I provide the job and they should grow into it. Well, maybe that's not totally all on them. You see, as the coach, we need to make sure that we are providing the right training, the right resources so that they can be successful in the job. What defines whether or not they're successful in the job? Well, it really should be, are they meeting the expectations of the job? If they're meeting the expectations of the job, then the next step is how do they grow into the future? In other words, if they're in one position, do they have the abilities to grow into another position? And if they do, have we recognized that? And are we helping them achieve their goals? So you see, as you approach evaluations on your dairy farm, I think it's important that you think about your position as the coach on the dairy farm and trying to bring everyone to a higher level, and in doing so, actually improving the quality of the employees that you actually have on your dairy farm, and in the end, you have a more successful dairy. Take some time, take some effort on all of our parts, but it's an important part of how we grow employees and how we make our workplace a better place for all who enjoy employment on our dairy. This is Mike Brook with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And you're listening to Agriculture Today. After this next break, it's our weekly conversation with K-State's Charlie Lee. This is the K-State Radio Network.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State Research and Extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
For you now on Agriculture Today, our weekly visit with wildlife specialist Charlie Lee, K-State Research and Extension. Well, Charlie, we're amidst another deer hunting season here in Kansas, and you wanted to pass along some thoughts to individuals, including hunters and landowners, about their potential role in deer management, and you think that could be amplified.
Yeah, there's lots of different methods at managing deer herds. Many landowners think that Wildlife and Parks is the deer manager. But when you get right down to smaller properties rather than statewide deer herds or even deer unit deer herds, it's the individual landowner that's responsible for the deer management. They can control the number of people that are on the property. Thus, they can control the number of deer that are harvested. They can control the sex and quality of those animals that are harvested. And when we talk about deer harvest and deer management, there's really 3 different approaches. We have traditional deer management, and that any antlered buck is harvested, really regardless of age or antler quality, and few does are harvested. And many states followed that approach, and it allowed the deer herd to grow quite rapidly because most does were not harvested. However, when the deer population reached a habitat carrying capacity or political carrying capacity, that approach was no longer effective. Science would support one of the other methods of deer management.
And another of those three would be, as we've talked to before, trophy hunting, and that's very distinctly going after certain deer, of course.
Yeah, a trophy deer management approach would be when only the fully mature bucks, let's say a deer from 5.5 to 7.5 years old with high-scoring antlers, are harvested. Occasionally there would be low-scoring middle-aged bucks that would be harvested, and does would be, or female deer would be very aggressively harvested so that you maintain a low deer density, thus hopefully providing optimum nutrition for the remaining deer. Trophy deer management is really not practical in much of the United States on what I would say maybe an average landowner's property. Even the hunting and non-hunting public don't like that approach. So the other approach that I think there's many ways to call it, and that would be quality deer management.
And this is a bit more involved, is it?
It's a little bit more involved, and it's an approach where young bucks are protected from harvest, and then an adequate number of female deer are harvested so that the herd stays in balance with the existing habitat conditions. It's really driven by habitat management. And if the habitat will support, let's say, 20 deer per square mile, then that's the number of deer that would be appropriate to have on that habitat. But if the habitat will only support 10 deer per square mile, it's not appropriate to have 20 deer per square mile on that property. It can improve the age structure by allowing those younger bucks to reach all different age classes, not just those 1.5 and 2.5 year old bucks that some people are unwilling to harvest. The quality deer management program focuses more on all of the variables: herd management, habitat management, hunter management, as well as the herd monitoring. And all of those cornerstones are certainly important when you're trying to decide which is the appropriate deer management strategy for your property.
You say that there's been some research which lends even more thought to what can be done about deer management here, suggesting that a minimum point harvest could change the balance of bucks and does?
Well, there's been some thought that when you do selective harvest, you can create a female-biased sex ratio, and that can lead to delayed breeding, reduced productivity, and a female-biased sex ratio of offspring. That then could result in different breeding behavior, and the population dynamics that would follow can adversely affect population growth. Journal of Wildlife Management this summer published a paper on the effect of male age structure on reproduction in white-tailed deer. And Pennsylvania, which was where the study took place, implemented a antler point harvest restriction to try to improve the quality of the deer in that particular state. So what they did was say, we're not going to be harvesting those buck deer that had a few points. We wanted to allow the age of those animals to increase, and we wanted to increase the harvest of female deer. The result of that program was that the deer density decreased almost 25%, and that the adult sex ratio, which in most cases would be deer that would be greater than 1.5 years of age, it declined slightly closer to the 1-to-1 ratio on female to males that many people are desiring. The ratio of the older male deer to the younger male deer shifted towards older male deer, which was what the intent was. But they found no evidence of any change in the timing or variability of the date of conception or productivity or the offspring sex ratio. So I think when you break it all down and look at some of those things, we've had a lot of time to think about deer management and whether we're really impacting by selectively harvesting deer, whether we're impacting future generations of deer. And many people are surprised that a lot of the research shows that even though we try to reduce the young deer, take them out of the breeding population, hope to pass on more genetic material as a result of the older age deer. We still have a lot of 1.5-year-old deer that are breeding. They're just much more active, and many studies have shown that those 1.5-year-old male deer are doing a majority of the breeding in that population, even when large trophy deer are present.
Nonetheless, you want to bring it back to the original message here, and that is that individuals, through thinking out their deer management, can make an impact on that deer population.
Yes, think about the strategy, what you want done with the deer herd on your property. Set your goals, then devise a strategy to manage the habitat, manage the population, manage the hunters, then reevaluate and decide what changes need to be made for next year.
Very well. Charlie, many thanks. Charlie Lee with that, wildlife specialist, K-State Research and Extension, with us right here each week. And our time is away for today. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.